Anyone who votes against this principle of the second reading is really betraying the will of the British people.
Please welcome to the stage, Kate Hope, MP.
Indeed, London, for that welcome. I don't always get that welcome in some parts of London. It is wonderful to be on a cross-party platform tonight, some from all parties and some in no parties at the moment. I want to say how wonderful it is that we're here in the capital city of the United Kingdom, but we're also here, of course, in the headquarters of the organisers, of those in big business, in the media, in some of the political parties at leadership level, and of course ex-prime ministers who have spent their time doing everything, not just before the referendum, but since, to thwart the view of the British people made in that referendum. And I see Tony Blair. Thank you. I hope for that even in London, yes. Even today, Tony Blair is continuing to make that case for a second referendum. And yet that referendum was supported by the overwhelming numbers of members of Parliament. Absolutely clear that they voted to have the referendum. And the referendum was voted in by many people across the country who'd given up on politics, or who had never voted, because they actually felt that politicians never listened to them. And they thought this time that if they voted Leave, and Leave won, then something special and something specific would change, and their vote would have mattered at last. They were promised, they were even warned repeatedly, that the result would be enacted. It was, according to David Cameron, to be a once-in-a-lifetime vote. Now, my view of a lifetime is, I hope, more than what a mole has, I think, of 3 years. It is meant to be the lifetime of people. But despite the dire warnings and the accusations that we all heard of being stupid and racist and not understanding, 17.4 million people defied the establishment and voted to leave. And I was so proud that 70% of constituencies that voted Leave had Labour MPs. That's a very important figure to remember. 2 days after the referendum, my 95-year-old mother, who was a long-time critic of the EU, said to me, Catherine, because that's what I'm known at home as, "You know, dear, they will never let us leave." And I said, "Oh, don't be silly, Mummy. You know, that's ridiculous. We live in a democracy. Parliament could never, ever go against that decision." I'm beginning to think that my mother was right. Let us be clear, the majority of MPs in Parliament currently are Remainers. They voted to remain. It is a Remain Parliament. And many of them have spent their time conspiring to do everything possible to stop us leaving. The lawyers, and there are many of them in the House of Commons, have had a field day, backed up, but I'm afraid to say, by a speaker who himself had bollocks to Brexit on his card. And yet that very same Parliament, for years, and I've been an MP 30 years next year, let treaty after treaty after treaty go through without ever asking the British people did they want to lose their sovereignty more and more to the EU. So Parliament, I am very clear indeed, and the public should be very clear, that no amendment in Parliament can override the legal position. No parliamentary vote, in my view, can be allowed to stop us leaving. We handed the decision to the people, and the people have decided. I think this is a very dangerous time for democracy in our country. The public are getting tired of politicians using their manifestos to get elected and then abandoning them. And just look at the manifesto of both the Conservatives and Labour last year. Neither party have kept to their commitments on the EU. And we've seen the dissatisfaction and the anger right across most other EU countries when politicians fail to listen to people. I and my other Labour colleagues in Labour Leave represent the great Labour tradition of patriotism, true internationalism and faith in the common sense of the British people. My first election that I stood in 1983 was on a manifesto that a Labour government would leave the European Economic Community. The tradition of Attlee, Benn, Gateskill, Peter Shore, and of course on the 100th anniversary of women voting for the first time, the charismatic Barbara Castle. And she made clear in 1971 in some great speeches when you look back to Parliament of just what joining the common market would lead to. And she was absolutely right. And if only the Labour Party now and Jeremy Corbyn was able to be true to his own instincts, we could be 10 points ahead in the polls. I know the Conservatives here won't like that, but we need to get back to our traditional Labour anti-European Union position. I don't believe that the Prime Minister ever really understood what motivated that huge Leave vote. Yes, she said Brexit means Brexit, but her idea of Brexit is not taking back sovereignty. Her withdrawal deal would still give control to the European Court of Justice. She spent more than 2 years cozying up to the EU, asking them for a half-baked deal that keeps us as close to their institutions as possible. And that's what the establishment have always wanted, that we would stay as close as possible, in theory leaving, but actually still being in the EU. She plays tough with our Parliament, disgracefully putting the vote at the last minute, whilst at the same time continually pushing the mantra that the EU will give us more. The EU will never, ever willingly give us anything. They don't. The European Union do not want the United Kingdom to be successful. They don't want us to be competitive. They don't want us to have trading deals with those Commonwealth countries who led the world and lead the world in economic development, like India, Singapore, Malaysia, all wanting to work with us in the Commonwealth family. But they don't want us to have power to make our own rules either, and laws in our own country. They have ruthlessly, in my view, exploited the weakness of our negotiators, who, as the eminent Martin Howe QC said very succinctly, that our negotiators have been as flexible as a limp lettuce. And it genuinely makes me angry and makes my blood boil when I see our Prime Minister, no matter how much I disagree with her, when I see her being humiliated in Brussels. Because that is our country that is being humiliated. The withdrawal agreement is a complete sellout and has to be defeated. We didn't vote for a deal. We voted to leave the European Union, and we knew what that meant. Why do our politicians from across Parliament not have more confidence in our country's ability to thrive and prosper outside the EU? There is a deliberate campaign to make a managed exit on world trade terms seem unthinkable. Journalists, many of them I had huge respect for, but journalists on some of our supposedly great political programmes do everything to stop any explanation of what this would mean. We saw that. I like to get my little BBC dig in. I think we saw that on Newsnight the other night with Kirsty Wark, absolutely shockingly not allowing John Redwood to get a word in about why World Trade Organization rules would be perfectly sensible. So they use the word catastrophic. They use it all the time. Well, I'll tell you what is catastrophic. It's leaving us locked into the EU, but without a voice, being half in, half out, a vassal state, still paying vast sums of money each year until they finally deign, if ever, to give us a trade agreement. Just think how different it would have been if the government was led by a Prime Minister who actually believed in Brexit. How on earth could we ever have agreed to sign a legally binding agreement, just giving away, as has been said earlier, £39 billion in advance of a single promise on trade? How could any UK Prime Minister agree a deal that separates out Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom? Just another of the Prime Minister's broken promises when she said no border down the Irish Sea. Now, you're going to be entertained, and I really do mean entertained, later by Sammy Wilson, so I'm not going to go into the border issue in a lot more detail. But as someone who grew up in Northern Ireland and proud, very proud to be pro-union, I feel very strongly about this. We didn't spend in Northern Ireland 30 years stopping IRA terrorists, killing soldiers, police and civilians in order to get a united Ireland, to allow a few jumped-up EU bureaucrats and a complicit Prime Minister to try to do the same thing by the back door. And even more ridiculously is that it would not even be in the economic interests of Northern Ireland, who depend so much on the trade to and from Great Britain. So why is a British Prime Minister dancing to the Irish Taoiseach's tune? There is no need for a hard border, and there is no need for a backstop. The Chancellor... Now, nearly finished. The Chancellor wants apparently to flush out extremists. And I don't think he meant just in his own party. I think he meant all of us. He wants to... and, you know, this is... I mean, it's actually... It's funny, but it's actually quite serious that you have a government senior figure calling the majority of the country extremists. Well, those who want to give our sovereignty away and forever prevent trade deals and welcome the EU court in looking at what we do, to me, those are the extremists. So, I do not, for all those people calling for a second referendum, a people's vote, a loser's vote, whatever you want to call it, I do not fear the result of another referendum. I genuinely think that the vote to leave would be bigger than before, but I fear the precedent that it would set. And why should we? The people have already spoken, and now their orders have to be carried out. Let us keep the faith here. Let us be optimistic. Let us make sure, because we know that we are on the right side of history. We need to keep united, we need to keep strong, and we will win. Thank you.
Start. She is an absolute star. We're incredibly lucky to have her commitment and her passion. And she talked about Philip Hammond. Frankly, what great business has he run? How many thousands of people has he employed? And billions of sales has he generated? None. Whereas the greatest entrepreneurs in our country, the Dysons, the Bamfords, the Hargreaves, the Martins of this world, they are totally and utterly comfortable and welcome the opportunity to go to world trade rules. And so we are incredibly lucky to have one of those great entrepreneurs with us tonight. A man who has created a fantastic business, a pub business. Almost, give or take, 1,000 pubs and growing. And he will entertain us superbly, as he always does. He's been hugely committed to this cause. He's given an incredible amount of time, whilst also running his business. If you haven't bought any of his shares, do, because the annual reports are fantastic. His statements to his shareholders are full of joy and optimism. Before we welcome Tim to the stage, let's just see a clip of him in action.
Wetherspoon, the chain of over 900 UK pubs, printed 200,000 beer mats criticising the EU and the IMF. And now the pub group's founder, Tim Martin, is taking the debate to his drinkers personally, visiting 100 of his pubs across the country, talking to customers and encouraging them to vote out.
I think it's probably overplayed. Economists got it completely wrong about the outcome of the referendum.
For example, that food prices will rise, that's come from big business, and it's not true.
So we believe the country would be better off with no deal because it's a protectionist system, so why not say it?
Please welcome to the stage, Tim Martin.
Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for that extremely warm welcome. I've discovered that selling beer at low prices can make you very popular. I was very apolitical. I wasn't really concerned about politics, quite neutral on the issue of Europe until we joined the exchange rate mechanism, which a lot of you will remember in here, where we were going to link our currency in about 1990 to the other currencies of Europe, and it was going to bring our interest rates down and bring inflation down. And what actually happened was that the opposite happened, and a lot of you in here today will remember it pushed interest rates right up. So my mortgage doubled, my bank, which was Barclays, got into trouble, it needed to be rescued, and with a massive rights issue. And there was huge unemployment, and eventually we didn't want to leave because the great and the good thought we should stay in it. We got thrown out and the whole system collapsed. So the logic of that was the predecessor of the euro. So a few years later, for the first time, someone said, we're now going to join the successor of the exchange rate mechanism. So you didn't need to be Albert Einstein to work out that this was a bad idea. And we had tremendous arguments then, and it was the same thing. It was the CBI said, you've got to join the euro. The Financial Times, the great and the good, Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson, Ken Clarke, same guys today. And they all said, if we don't join it, there will be severe economic problems. The car companies will move to the continent because they'll be exposed to exchange rate problems. In our latest magazine, I put the head of Oxford University, the Chancellor of Oxford University, wrote a big article after article in about 2000 saying how terrible it would be if we didn't join the euro. And to coin, since Kate's already said it, I can use it. It all turned out to be bollocks. But I'm going to apologise slightly to Jacob, because it didn't affect everyone who'd been to Oxford and Cambridge University in this way. He's one of a minority of maybe 5%, 10%. But what you have is the university-educated people of the land, most of them, or many of them, have adopted the idea of European federalism. And it's almost a quasi-religion. So logic goes out the window. That's why they wanted to join the euro. There was no logic in a currency that isn't backed by a government. It doesn't work. Look at Greece, 15% unemployment in Spain. So the next toxic idea of the day, which is from the same quarters, from the CBI, FT, etc., is that we need a deal. Now, that's a toxic idea, isn't it? If I say I want to buy your house and I won't have any other, I'm not going to put the price down, am I? So if you say you need a deal at any price, which is effectively what the CBI has said, the FT has said, etc., it's a cliff edge with no deal, then you're stuffed in terms of trying to negotiate anything decent. The fact is that far from being a cliff edge, on the 29th of March next year, if we leave with no deal, we save 39 billion quid. Whenever I wake up in the morning, and you're probably the same, I always think being 39 billion quid better off is a good start to the day, isn't it? The other thing that we can do is that we can regain control of our fishing overnight. So that's very good for our coastal communities, but what's good for them is good for us. And there isn't a snowball's chance in hell if Theresa May agrees to this deal that she's going to go back and have complete control over the fishing on the 29th of March. None. The other thing we can do is we can eliminate tariffs. They're really taxes on non-EU imports. Not necessarily straight away, perhaps on things we produce here. You can argue over that. But I haven't seen many people growing bananas in the UK, or avocados, or coffee, or New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, or Aussie Merlot, or children's clothes. 12,000 products are taxed. And do you know what happens to the money? It's collected by the UK government. Where does it go? Brussels. It goes to Brussels. So you're in the unusual situation, if you're in government, of being able to get rid of these tariffs, not lose any income, and the public becomes a bit better off. Not only that, you give a signal to other countries in the world that you're a free trader, like Singapore, like New Zealand, like Australia, like Canada, which have slashed these tariffs. And they do extraordinarily well. There's this Aussie High Commissioner who likes the UK a lot. They're not all sledgers and iron ore miners. He likes the UK, and he said, free trade never made anyone poorer. He didn't say free trade's a cliff edge. The main other factor, of course, is that we regain democracy. Now, the EU has 5 unelected presidents. That is not democracy. It's got a court which isn't accountable to national parliaments, and I'm afraid to say a mock parliament, because the members of that parliament, the MEPs, can't even initiate legislation. That is not democracy. And democracy is economic steroids. Just look around the world, North Korea versus South. Look at how Japan became the second biggest economy in the world just a few decades after it became democratic. So it may seem chaotic, but democracy works. Folks, the scare stories are falling apart. Slowly, but they're backed by lurid articles in the FT, lurid comments from a lot of people. But they said the banks were all going to leave. Well, there are more people employed 3.5 months before Brexit Day than there were at the time of the referendum, so they haven't gone. Property prices in the city have gone up, so that doesn't indicate that people think they will go. One of the scare stories is that planes are not going to fly. I thought, well, let's assume the EU are stupid enough to say you can't land your planes in this country. I thought, we've got the planes, we've got the runway, we've got the money. Morocco's nice this time of year. The other scare story is that Kent will become a lorry park. Now, I don't believe that, and you don't believe it either. But at Wetherspoon, we decided to do a little experiment. So we said, OK, we're going to take French brandy, and we're going to take French champagne, and we'll take the German imported spirit, Jägermeister, #1 imported spirit in the UK today, and a number of other products. I'm going to swap them for UK products, UK sparkling wine. I'm a free trader, and so are you. I believe in free trade, but there comes a time, which I think has arrived now, where we have to show a bit of muscle. And our trade has gone up since we've introduced UK and even a few Aussie and Kiwi products. American brandy, it's really good, you should try it. The EU is only 7% of the world, so a lot of the arguments in favour of doing a deal are that we need frictionless trade. But if you believe in frictionless trade with 7% of the world, what about the other 93%? I'm just going to finish up. I'm going out of time here on my screen. I think we've got to be very wary of what I think is a legal filibuster. I've studied law myself. I qualified as a barrister, and I know when I can't understand a legal document. But the American Constitution 200 years ago, and boy has it, you can say not too fond of Trump or whatever, boy has North America been successful. Look at North America versus South, which didn't have democracy, the poor guys, you know, but the North's been so powerful and a great friend of ours. But 200 years ago, they decided they needed a constitution, and they took 9 months to make it, and they had a representative from each state there. And you know how long it is? 4 pages. And it's a very, very good constitution, and it works. And the withdrawal agreement from the EU alone is 580 pages. But this is a serious point, folks, here, because the law is now being used as a battering ram to drain away surreptitiously democracy from the country. It's been done under the guise of the rule of law, using lawyers, diplomats, etc., who are, in most cases, convinced about the need for rule by technocrats from Brussels, which we don't agree with. So it's very dangerous for us. So I think I was trying to think of delay, of course, is another real problem in this, which we've got to be extremely wary of. Paul Simon summed it up. Just get out the back, Jack. Make a new plan, Sam. No need to be coy, Roy. Set yourself free!
And boy, oh boy, aren't we glad he became a publican and didn't say a barrister. To our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, another MP of huge courage, a man who knows a thing or two about negotiation. Frankly, he should have been in charge of this negotiation because we would have ended up in a completely different place. He's strong. He's brave. He's going to tell us about the Irish border, about the nonsense, the gibberish, the fabrications. And he's a fantastic speaker. Before we welcome him to the stage, let's just see him in action.
We will not be voting for any deal which calls into question the integrity of the United Kingdom. We will be leaving the single market. We will be leaving the customs union. That is, of course, what people voted for. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, it would be detrimental to the union if we had a situation where Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland had the right to say to the people of the whole of the United Kingdom, we don't care how you voted. Don't take any dictation from the EU. Stand up to them, dig your feet in, and they will give in.
Please welcome to the stage
Sammy Wilson MP.
Already. Wave the flags there for me, please. Because the EU, as a punishment to the people of the United Kingdom, are demanding that the price of leaving will be to break up the United Kingdom. We won't let them. I've only got 10 minutes. These are not my notes. But I brought it along tonight because I wanted to show you what we're going to pay £39 billion for. £700,000 a page, nearly. And every page carries an obligation to bow the knee to the EU and to destroy the vote of the people of the United Kingdom. If we abided by this agreement, folks, all of what people voted for would not be delivered. This requires us to stay in the customs union. It requires us to tie ourselves to EU law. It only allows us to be free if the EU says we can be free. And even if we do decide that we want to break away, Northern Ireland will be left as an annex of the EU. And will not have... It goes further. And I'm not joking you. There's actually parts of this, if you look at Article 29 of the agreement, where we have to keep on putting out EU propaganda. And when we leave, according to Article 127, we can't even say bad things about them. And the Prime Minister says it's a good deal. Del Boy and Arthur Dilly would be ashamed to call it that. And how do we get into this mess? How do we get tied up with this? Well, and you heard from Kate. This is all down to a problem that exists along the Irish border. It was thought at one stage that the 10 Northern Ireland MPs who take their seats in the House of Commons would be the people who could either make or break this deal. We're an irrelevancy now. Because there are that many people against this deal, we could sit at home and watch it on the TV. But Northern Ireland is an irrelevancy in this. Because, of course, Northern Ireland is now being used by the EU in an attempt to keep the UK in the EU. And this was brought about when and I think the EU, the negotiators sat down. How can we create a problem which creates a situation where we can say you cannot leave because there are such big problems? And the Irish government and the EU sat down and they contrived the biggest con trick that you could ever think of. Back in Northern Ireland and in Ireland as a whole, we have, if you tell a tall story, it's called you go and kiss the Blarney Stone. In this case, they made love to the Blarney Stone, I think, when they came up with this one. Because, of course, the EU and the Irish government have created a problem which does not exist. And let's just look at it. Let's just look at it. First of all, they say that you could not have us leaving the EU without a hard border. Now, I don't know what a hard border means yet, and nobody's ever explained it. And certainly, if by a hard border you mean that you have to have the border totally closed, we couldn't do that with 50,000 troops, with watchtowers, with patrols, with roads being blown up. We couldn't do it. And yet we're told it'll mean a hard border. In fact, Leo Varadkar has suggested at one stage we might even have to have a Berlin Wall around the border. I don't know who's going to build it. Donald Trump, when he's finished at Mexico, might want to come over and do it for us too. So, what would it mean? What would you have to do for a hard border? I'll tell you one thing, if 50,000 troops couldn't do it, a lot of barber poles across the main roads between Northern Ireland and the Republic won't do it either. But it's not even necessary, folks. Every day, trade goes across the Irish border and taxes are collected. Every day into the Irish Republic comes trade from third countries, from China, from Africa, from South America, where there are no similar rules to what there are in the EU. Is every container opened? No, of course it's not. The goods come in, they go to the shops, trading standards officers check them. They don't need to be checked at the border. They're checked at the point of sale or the point of distribution. And when it comes to animal checks, we already do animal checks. We have similar veterinary standards. It's all doable. And yet we are told that this is necessary. It's a con trick, of course. It's a con trick devised to keep us in the EU. Now, the Prime Minister would say, oh no, it's only temporary. In fact, the EU don't even really want it. They spent a year and a half fighting for it. They sent her away today with her tail between her legs because they wouldn't even make an amendment to it. And we're told they don't want it. Of course the EU want it, because it's a way of keeping us in. And every action that they've taken shows that. Only this week we've had the European Court of Justice ruling that we can extend Article 50 time if we want, unilaterally. Here's an organisation that usually works about the same pace as evolution, and it made a decision within 4 or 5 days. There's nothing political about that. They don't want to keep us in. Of course they do. And as the deadline approaches, I can tell you that this deal, or any of the amendments which the Prime Minister is seeking to it, we don't want assurances. Assurances. I mean, listen, the assurances will be given by people who will not even be there after May, because there's European elections. They would have to be exercised by a government that might not even be in power when we have to do these things. So what are the assurances worth? And I believe that come the 29th of March, folks, we must leave. And unlike those who are spreading hysteria at the moment, I don't believe that leaving on those terms, leaving without an agreement with the EU, will be a disaster. We've been told that there'll be no food in the shops, no medicines in the hospitals, no Mars bars. I could do without that anyway for a wee while. We'll be starving. I don't understand this. For 6 years during the war, U-boats, the Luftwaffe, the Wehrmacht couldn't starve us out. And yet we are told that a bunch of bureaucrats from Brussels, armed with the European Code of Customs, are going to stop all of our trade, are going to starve us out. In the words of the old Dad's Army theme, who do you think you're kidding, Mr. Hammond, if you think we'll fall for it? I just want to finish off on a serious note, though, because what's at stake here, folks, is that people voted. They came out in their millions and voted in June of 2016. They expect politicians to deliver on that. If you want to undermine democracy, then you go for the kind of deal which keeps us half in the EU and half out of the EU, and only ability to get freed when the EU decide to let us go. That's not democracy. And I'll tell you, from the point of view of Northern Ireland, we are not going to accept, in the words of the Attorney General, a situation where we have to regard the rest of the United Kingdom as a third country, where we find ourselves cut off from our main market, where we find that we can't take part in trade deals, where we find that forever we will have our laws made in Brussels without any input or any ability to change them, regardless of how damaging they are. That's not democracy, that's dictatorship. We'll not have it.
Isn't he fantastic? Didn't I tell you he should have been in charge of the negotiation? We'd have ended up with 4 pages, not 585. And we wouldn't have spent 39 billion. Can you believe it? 700 grand a page. That's why barristers do so well, Tim. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is another fantastic Labour MP. He comes from Manchester. He led the city council up there for 12 years. He's absolutely passionate about making things better for the least well off, the lowest paid, and he knows, as we do, that a proper Brexit will help the least well off, the lowest paid, the most, because the price of food, clothing and footwear will go down, not up. He's hugely passionate. He's faced all sorts of abuse from his colleagues in Parliament and other parts of the Labour Party. But before we welcome Graham to the stage, let's just see him in action.
Good morning, Chu. Can you tell us which way you're going to vote today and why?
I will vote for the second reading of the bill. The bill is necessary for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. That was the commitment the Labour Party gave. What you have is the political project being protected at the centre, at the expense not just of the Greeks actually, but the whole of youth across Portugal, Spain, Italy, Cyprus, Greece. I do not believe in the long term, because I'm a Democrat, you can sustain the European Union if you don't have the support of the people. And that finally is why the EU project will fail.
Please welcome to the stage
Graham Stringer MP.
That was a wonderful speech by Sammy, and I wouldn't pretend to know as much about the Irish border as Sammy does, but I do know he's right, that this is a put-up job by the European Union. When Croatia's a great place to go for your holidays, joined the European Union, I went into the debate to see what was happening. I'd not prepared a speech, went in to see what the arguments were. All these passionate pro-EU people were absent. They didn't care. Things were going their way, the EU was expanding. I also had looked at the House of Commons notes on Croatia. What they told me, Croatia would provide one of the longest borders between the rest of Europe and the EU, that it was a border where people were trafficked, there was sex traders going through there, that Croatia did not have the rule of law and was harbouring war criminals. No problem. No problem. About the border, no problem. Croatia was admitted. And the fact is, the fundamental hypocrisy of the EU, like all imperialist organisations that are expanding, if they're expanding, they will take anybody. Yeah. If you try to leave, they will try and stop you because they want to control that territory and they want our money. We are at a particularly serious moment in our history. People keep saying, has there ever been a time like this in our history? I don't think there has, quite frankly. There is no analogous time that I can think of. In terms of its importance, it might be similar to the row about the 1910 budget between the House of Lords and the then Liberal government, or the Corn Laws, or maybe even the 17th century rows about a constitutional monarchy. The country will not be the same, whatever decisions we arrive at, and it is absolutely vital that the decision we arrive at is to respect the referendum. But it is not only vital, we're at the middle of a constitutional crisis. Not the constitutional crisis you might read about in the quality press, about the shenanigans in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. They're important, but they're not abnormal. What is unusual and unique and unprecedented is that it is now a row between Parliament and the people. Of which, as opposed to previous times in history, the government, ploughing a slightly different furrow, are on the side of Parliament and against the people. And it is absolutely vital that the people win. When David Cameron put the proposition, second reading, to the House of Commons that we should have a referendum, having he'd won the 2015 election, he said, the people are sovereign. When the Labour frontbench spokesperson, Hilary Benz, stood up, he said, this is not our decision. The people will decide, not the members of Parliament. You can go back and check those in Hansard. They're more or less explicit quotes from both of them. But what happened? The people didn't do as they were told. The establishment are still in a state of shock. They can't believe that this extraordinary life that they've been living, and it's cosy for them, not cosy for the rest of us who are not doing as well as we can because we're in the EU. I can't believe that the people saw through the sham that is the EU. So what do you do when that happens? Well, you're all stupid, aren't you? You didn't understand what it was. Well, I went out on the day and talked to people. They weren't angry. People only voted this way because they were poor, or they were angry. Actually, people had a profound and fundamental sense of democracy, a profound and fundamental sense, a very gentle sense of patriotism. As somebody said to me on the day of the election, in an estate in my constituency that doesn't turn out to vote in high numbers, usually it turned out twice as many people, we should be making our own laws, shouldn't we? That's what it's about. And that is as profound an understanding of democracy as you will find anywhere. So having denigrated the majority of people, people who want to remain are looking for other arguments. We'll have a second referendum. What it would be about, it's not clear. Would it be about the deal? If people didn't understand a very simple proposition in or out of the EU, how would they understand 575 pages of really rather difficult prose? The SNP get particularly annoyed in debates when I point out to them that if you have a second referendum because people change their mind, well, they apply that to themselves if they ever get Scottish independence. Well, they say, fine, there's an opinion poll now thought it was a bad idea, we'll take it back to the people. Of course they won't, and neither would anybody else. You cannot, on the basis, you cannot, having taken a referendum, every time there's an opinion poll that shows a different result, go back to the people. It's fundamentally insulting, and it undermines the very essence of consulting and letting the people decide in the first place. This is a platform, and there are going to be 2 more people on the platform. And I think it's fairly safe to say that even with Kate, and we're in the same party, sometimes we disagree. I would disagree with other people on the platform on a whole series of things. But this is the right for us to disagree, put those disagreements to the ballot box, and so people can choose whether it's Conservative or UKIP or Liberal Democrats or Labour MPs, and not have those decisions taken by unelected bureaucrats, which is effectively what the EU is about. And one of the arguments is people have learnt things since the referendum. Well, We've learned that the Prime Minister wants to give £39 billion away. But I don't think we've learned anything new about the EU itself. Actually, the whole experience has validated the criticism of the EU in the first place. The EU was set up by European elites, possibly for good reasons, one understands it. Many of their countries had been fascist, some had been communist, some had been invaded and controlled by other countries, and they basically had given up on the trust of democracy. Well, we haven't. I fundamentally believe, even when the Labour Party loses elections, if the people decide it, that has to be abided by, and that is what democracy means. The fight with the EU now is a fight against a European establishment, a European elite who are fundamentally and totally hostile to the concept of democracy. I want to finish really on the final point about the debate that somehow, even if you accept the democratic arguments, which I think is the fundamental argument, that the EU is economically good for people. Well, when John opened, he said he'd traded in all the continents around the world. The only continent that has economically done less well than the EU is Antarctica. All the other continents have done rather better, and the reason for it is not that difficult to ascertain. It is that if you make your own laws, if you make your own rules, if you make those rules and laws that are appropriate for your economy, so where you've got strengths, you can regulate, pass laws, get better regulations that fit what you want to do, then you're going to do better. And if you can then trade, 98% of the world's trade is on World Trade Organization rules. In the other continents that are trading, they're growing. The European Union is not growing because it's sclerotic and it's economically slow. So it is one of the great lies that we would be better off for jobs in the EU than we are out of it. I think if there's no deal, it's no problem. This country can trade, benefit and grow if we make our own laws that suit ourselves and we do it democratically. Thank you very much. Thank you.
A true democrat, and what a simple example. Antarctica and the European Union. They go well together. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, needs little introduction, but it is just worth reminding ourselves the commitment to the cause that he has given. Possibly the original Brexiteer. He has devoted over 25 years of his life to getting the United Kingdom out of the European Union. And the courage to do that, the bravery, the abuse, not only to him, but to his family, his children, has been utterly hideous to watch. But he is a man of bravery and of huge courage. Not even a small problem with an aeroplane could keep him down. When it crashed on one election day, he pulled himself out, he wiped away the blood, he stood up, he dusted himself down, and he pulled out a fag and lit it. Don't think he's gone away, ladies and gentlemen. He's absolutely here. He is in full campaign mode. Before we welcome him to the stage, let's just remind ourselves of him in action.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air.
For goodness sake, get rid of not just the worst Prime Minister I've ever seen, but perhaps the most dishonest one as well. I'm going to try and get the people to let their members of Parliament know they will not accept being betrayed.
And I tell you what, if I have to do this again, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
We had a referendum. We voted for something. Our politicians should deliver this.
We have made our minds up in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country.
I trust the voice of the people more than the politicians.
Please welcome to the stage Nigel Farage.
From Brussels, one of my favourite cities in the world, and a place in which, of course, I am myself immensely popular. But it wasn't me last night that was being abused in Brussels, though I have been for much of the last 20 years. No, the abuse that was going on last night, the arrogance that was going on last night, the bullying that was going on last night, the thuggery that was going on last night was coming from unelected bureaucrats, people like Jean-Claude Juncker treating, and listen, I'm not a fan of Mrs. May. Oh no. But when she goes abroad, like it or not, she is the leader of our country. And to see her being talked down to by that bunch of gangsters yesterday was a shaming moment for them and for us. In fact, what she really should have done, she should have said, I will not be talked to like this by jumped up foreign bureaucrats, and walked out of the room. What she should have done. And then, in a midnight press conference, Jean-Claude Juncker uses a variety of terms of abuse about the British Prime Minister and her negotiating position, and says that much of her approach has been nebulous. And this morning, did you see the film? She confronted him. She said, you called our approach nebulous. And Jean-Claude Juncker denied it. Well, of course he denied it. It was after a good dinner, wasn't it? But honestly, what we saw was appalling, and we've seen it from the very start. This organisation, this European Union, is not just a fundamentally undemocratic place, it's an anti-democratic place. And you know, we were told by the Remainers in the referendum that a vote to remain meant everything would stay the same. Well, think what has happened since 2016. Hungary have had their voting rights suspended. Poland have had their voting rights suspended. The new, and in my opinion, rather splendid Italian government have had their budget rejected. And now we know that when Nick Clegg, oh, I'm sorry, Sir Nick Clegg, when Sir Nick Clegg told us
that it was a dangerous fantasy to imagine there'd be a European army. Now the plans are clear. There will be a European army by 2025. Now the plans are clear. They will have foreign policy without veto. They will continue with their programme of expansion, and all over Europe. On the left and the centre and the right, we are seeing new political parties and movements rising up and saying, we wish to be nation states, proud of our identity, our culture, our nationality, and, most important of all, our nation-state democracy. Thank goodness we voted Leave. But the problem is not all with the bureaucrats. Yes, they have power without accountability, but much of the problem, I'm afraid, lays not with the Remainers. Look, they never accepted the referendum result, did they? They've campaigned from day one, from June the 24th, Tony Blair. Yeah, he's our best asset, really, isn't he? Must admit, the one person I do respect on the other side is Michel Barnier. Because what he's done is to run rings around our useless civil service and a Prime Minister who was a Remainer, and I'm sorry to say, still is a Remainer. She has put together what is the worst deal in history. It isn't just the 39 billion. It isn't just the backstop that could leave us trapped inside the customs union. It's the commitment in many other areas, including security and military, that we will stay closely linked with all the institutions of the European Union. I first saw this with her Florence speech. Because remember, the Lancaster House speech was really rather good, wasn't it? I mean, there I was, hearing a British Prime Minister uttering words and phrases that I'd been abused for using for the previous 2 decades, and suddenly there she was. I thought, wow, maybe we're going to get there. But what we saw at Florence was the Prime Minister of a country who'd spent decades trying to opt out of parts of the European Union, going with a mandate to leave, trying to opt back in to parts of the European Union. And I sensed then, and I wrote and said then, that the great Brexit betrayal had begun. And I would love to think that I was wrong about this, but I don't think I am. The deal clearly is dead. I don't think there are any circumstances that are going to make Sammy Wilson vote for this deal. And nor should he. And nor should he. And 117 Conservative, well, they're not all backbenchers, of course. Some of them are ministers who simply lied about the way in which they voted. Duplicity is not just the Prime Minister's reserve. But it's pretty clear that unless Jeremy Corbyn decided that Labour would rescue the government with this deal is not going to go through. And we can raise half a cheer that this awful deal, this worst deal in history, is not going to go through. But we do, with 15 weeks to go until the day that we're due to leave the European Union, we do actually now face perhaps a pretty clear choice as to what is before us. One choice before us that is laid down in legislation that exists today is that we will leave without a so-called deal and become an independent, self-governing nation that makes its own laws. I mean, no deal, no problem. And I'm really bored with being told by people who've never had a proper job in their lives how much damage it will do to trade. None of them understand the great potential, the opportunity that we have to be freed of the Brussels bureaucracy, to set legislation for our own financial services industry, our own fishing industry. We can be in control of our lives, our destiny, and I tell you what, we'll do a damn sight better job than Mr. Juncker and the gang in Brussels. But the problem is, will this Prime Minister and will this Cabinet that includes people like Philip Hammond? It's great, a new bogeyman, it's great news. Well, I'm getting bored with Blair and Ken Clarke. I've got someone new now, you know. But when you've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer describing 17.4 million people as extremists, and when the vast majority, you look very extreme, sir, I must say. But when you've got a leader, a cabinet, and a parliament like this, we can, if we want, stand here tonight and say, no deal, no problem. We can comfort ourselves that the EU Withdrawal Act is there in legislation. We can look forward to big parties starting at 11 p.m. on the 9th of the 29th of March. We can look forward to it. And by the way, I love Tim Martin, but why he's going on a pub crawl of 100 boozers round Britain and has not invited me, I don't know. Tim, I'm up for it, mate. I'm up for it. We'll start this evening. And we can comfort ourselves with our rhetoric, with our knowledge and our belief in who we are and what we are, and to celebrate that greatest ever democratic exercise in the history of our nation will come to fruition in 15 weeks' time. But I'm afraid, folks, I don't quite see it like that. I don't think that the great Brexit betrayal is anywhere near finished. And I am now more fearful than I've been at any point in this process, that outrageous, monstrous though it is, we're going to finish up being sent back for a second referendum. And I can see the collusion that is going on between Monsieur Barnier and many of our British politicians and many of the multinational businesses, and what last night was all about. Actually, why they were so rude to her, why they're now even saying that maybe Article 50 could not be extended. We just need to take the European Court judgment of outright rescinding it, is they know that is impossible for this country to accept. They have managed in the past to engineer second referendums in Denmark. They've done it twice in Ireland. And my message, folks, tonight is, much as I don't want a second referendum, it would be wrong of us here on a Leave Means Leave platform not to get ready, not to prepare for the worst case scenario. You know, we must not fail in our preparation. We really must not do that, because I fear they'll do this to us. Now, if I'm wrong, we've lost nothing. But this organisation, which I joined a few months ago, and which has held these events up and down the country, we've now got to move into a different gear. We've now got to start forming branches and active groups all over this country. We've got to be out there. We've got to re-engage. We've got to re-engage with those millions of people who've never voted in their lives before, some of whom are now saying to themselves, what was the point of voting? We've got to connect with them and give them hope, and many of them particularly in the Midlands and the north of England. We have got to become the group that is ready for whatever contingency. And if all our efforts and all our money and all our preparation for whatever may come to nothing because we leave on 11 p.m. on March the 29th next year, then so much the better. But please, folks, can I urge you, can I implore you, let's get ready for every situation. I don't trust this Prime Minister. I don't trust this Cabinet. I don't trust our politicians. I think they will, in the next few months, betray us completely, and let us be ready, not just to fight back, not just to prepare for that referendum, but if it comes, we'll win it next time by a much bigger margin, and that'll be enough.
As you can see, this is just a quiet night for Nigel. He's ready. If necessary, we have to be ready. Our final speaker, we'll come back to that, sir. Our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is another MP of great integrity. Without question, the politest gentleman in the House of Commons. Without question, the best dressed gentleman in the House of Commons. And without question, the best spoken gentleman in the House of Commons, who has the record for using the longest word at a mere 28 letters. If he's on form and you're nice to him, he might practice it this evening. Before we welcome Jacob to the stage, let's just see him in action on the video.
These Conservatives say they want Britain out of the customs union and the single market.
But the Prime Minister must realise that under all constitutional norms, she ought to go and see the Queen urgently and resign. What we need is a leader who will say to the European Union, it is impossible to divide up the United Kingdom. It is impossible to agree to a situation where we have a perpetual customs union. It is impossible to pay £39 billion of taxpayers' money. But let's leave let's leave my despicability to one side, because what's important is to have the discussion. The United Kingdom Parliament, the most ancient democratic parliament in the world, has been made powerless.
Please welcome to the stage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for staying. You always think if you're the last one off, people will have headed to the bar by this stage in the evening, so I'm extremely flattered that you have restrained yourselves and will be going at one of Tim's pubs later. We know the basic facts, don't we? That the European Union is a failing economic model, and that the defeatist attitude of the British establishment is about managing decline. It essentially takes the view that the UK can never do as well as it did in the past, that our best days are behind us, and that all we can hope for is to shelter behind the EU's protectionist wall to keep out some of the globalist winds that will blow, and if we shelter, perhaps we will hold on to some level of prosperity. But when you look at the European Union, you see that this isn't actually true. that the winds have got through that wall, they're beginning to blow down that wall, and that so many European economies are failing, and that their institutions are failing with them. Just look at France. France, Paris, riots every week, people wearing yellow jackets, and they're not George Osborne, are taking to the streets week in, week out, in a great tradition of French opposition to the hierarchy. Look at Italy, rejecting the orders, the rules, the commands of Brussels. But of course you would if you were Italian reject it, because you've had no economic growth for 20 years. Your standard of living hasn't been getting any better. But if you're Greek, your standard of living has been crushed. Now we know all this, but we also know that actually the way to achieve prosperity is to have those key things that make a prosperous state. The rights of property, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and democracy. All of these are essential components of success. If you take a single one of them away, you find that the others are not protected. So free speech protects democracy. Democracy protects the rights of property. The rights of property are part of the rule of law. The four always come together. But in the European Union, one of them is taken away which undermines the other three. And that is the democratic issue. When you look at European competences, there are things that as a member of parliament you can no longer do. You can no longer seek that ancient right of redress of grievance for your constituent when it relates to agriculture, or not applicable to my constituency, it's landlocked, or fishing, or whether it's to do with the regulations, or whether it's to do with rules affecting the city, or whether it's to do with tariffs. All of this, ladies and gentlemen, is outside your democratic control. It's been passed up to a higher authority. And we need to remind ourselves why this matters. Because here we are, we're 2 and a bit years in, and we're looking at 585 pages of text. 68 pages. Do you know what 68 pages do? They list one by one all the regulations that are going to apply to Sammy, but not to me. 68 pages. They just list them by number. They're not writing out all the regulations. And think you're getting excited that it was only 68 pages of regulations. No, 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 no. It's 68 pages naming and listing the regulations, which are thousands and thousands of pages when you turn to the regulations themselves. Now, that is an undemocratic way of approaching it, but it is also a distraction from why we wanted to leave. We wanted to leave because we think, ladies and gentlemen, that we can do things better for ourselves. We believe our understanding of society and of political life. We believe that individuals coming together into communities form society, and that from that society we get a nation state, a government that has legitimacy because it relates to the people who founded it. We have a conception of parliamentary democracy and sovereignty where Parliament has authority not falling from it on high, but given to it, ladies and gentlemen, by each and every one of you for a 5-year term, returnable to you intact at the end of that 5-year term. We think that is how our society is created, how our nation is created, and that is where legitimacy lies. And that theory is great and powerful and important and inspires us because our nation's story is so intertwined with its development. But it's there for a purpose. It's not there because it's a good idea or because we've done it for hundreds of years. It's there because it leads to the most prosperous society that you can imagine. And we know that when we look around the world because we know that the societies that work best are the ones that have the systems that we have evolved, that they have in fact copied from us. We look at the United States, the richest country in the world, and we see that it is based on our governmental systems, the rights of property, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and democracy. And so we see historically that prosperity comes from these great things, from our core democratic values. And so when we look at leaving the European Union, we are banishing the idea of managing decline. We are saying instead that through our own efforts, through our willingness to be entrepreneurs, to have novel ideas, to take risks and to implement what we want to do, we can make the standard of living of the British people better. And then we can look at the details of how we do that. It's been quoted before, there is not a country in the world that has traded freely that has ever got less prosperous from doing so. Because we believe that we should put the consumer first and that the price of goods for the consumer should be lower. Why? Why don't we protect inefficient producers instead? Well, the reason is that if consumers have better value, they've got more money to spend on other things. They've got money that they can save, and that gets lent to business, encouraging more business. There is a virtuous circle that is created by reducing the cost of transactions, and the starting point is opening up to free trade by removing tariffs. But it goes further than that, because the EU is equally in this business of managing decline. And therefore what it wants to do is to regulate to keep producers from the rest of the world out, to protect inefficient European producers. The regulations are not about health and safety. That is the excuse, the pretext for making lower cost producers unable to sell into European markets. And that makes all of us less well off. It means our own producers have a full sense of security and a protection that is not in the end going to make them prosperous and successful. And that if we can therefore remove tariffs and remove non-tariff barriers, we open ourselves up to improving all our standards of living. But we free ourselves not just from those outward-facing barriers, but inwardly we can be more innovative and more successful. If you look at the regulations in my own area, in financial services, what do? They are making the City of London less efficient. Not less efficient than Frankfurt or Paris, which in this really don't matter, but less efficient than New York and Singapore and Hong Kong. For we must compete with the world, not just with the small, narrow, outdated European system. So we want to look at those internal regulations that are affecting us, not just the barriers to trading with the world. We need to look at the regulations that affect the 87% of businesses that don't trade with the European Union, yet have to follow the regulations as if they did. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, this is about whether or not you believe in yourselves. Do you think, as you sit here, that the decisions you make for yourselves will be better decisions than other people can make for you? Do you think that your economic decisions and your life decisions should be made by you or by these wise people on this panel? However good we are, you still make better decisions for yourselves and just think we could be European commissioners. You know that it is in your hands to succeed. We know it's in our nation's hands to succeed. We are taking this wonderful, this exciting, this generational opportunity to take back control, not because we simply believe it as a matter of dogma, but because we know it will make us more prosperous, stronger, and more successful in generations to come. That is the prize. It is so exciting in all the discussions on the 585 pages. Do not forget that taking back control is about doing things better, succeeding, and prospering. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming towards the end of our evening. Do you know we, Leave Means Leave, have hundreds of business owners and entrepreneurs who support our cause. They believe in Britain. The establishment of Britain do not believe in Britain. This is the problem we are facing. When I made my speech at the British Chamber's conference in March 2016 and said that Britain could do better off out, the first person to come up to me and shake my hand was the next speaker on stage. That person who said, "What a fantastic speech, how much do I agree with you," was one Jeremy Corbyn. The Conservative Party manifesto said very clearly that we would leave the single market, the customs union, and we would not any longer be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. The Prime Minister has lied and lied and lied. But she did not have the wool pulled over her eyes by the European Union. She got the deal she wanted because she wants to remain in the customs union and remain close to Europe. Before we leave tonight, there's a few things I'd like you to do for me. The first thing I'd like you to do is thank our fantastic panel of speakers. It's a bit like the Communist Party meetings in China, and they all take that every weekend. The second thing, which is also directed to the average of 100,000 people who watch these rallies live streamed at home, is to take the time to write to your MP and tell them that if they don't get us to leave on the 29th of March 2016, you will never vote for them again. So, thank you.
I hope they don't like me, because I'm all right.
Freudian slip. We should have been out 2 years ago. 2019. The third... All in good time. The third thing I would like you to do is to grab your banners, grab those things that are in front of you and on your seats, and stand up. Because I want us to send a very loud message to the cloth-eared people in Parliament.
I'm in Parliament. No, I'm not doing.
What do we want?
Thank you.
Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.